the second one? Interest something ratio?
Coverage ratio.
Coverage.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, those of you out there in Zoom land, if you want to turn your cameras on, please do, because it helps me to get a sense of whether you're paying attention or not. All right. Let us begin today with the focus on lenders trying to evaluate properties as to whether or not to make loans on them. So one of the top things that a lender tends to do, and we're going to explore several different items, but one thing they do, they look at debt service coverage ratios and they look at loan to value ratios. Now there are several other things, as I said, that they're going to look at, but these are like two of the big ones whenever evaluating whether or not to make a commercial loan, is really going to be focused on debt service coverage ratio and loan to value ratio. Now, how does all this work in terms of what sort of analysis is the lender doing? All right, so they're going to, in essence, put the property through their own internal metrics as to the property's performance. So let's just try to come up with a scenario, and we're going to kind of just work through the flow, and then you can kind of begin to get a sense for what the lender is looking at and why they're looking at it the way they are. All right. So let's start off with the traditional sort of income statement. Which we've gone over, obviously, before. And let's create the scenario from scratch. So let's say that we've got a small commercial property, could be an office building. You tell me, you want an office building, shopping center, apartment community? Okay, apartment community it is. Okay, so we've got a small apartment community. All right, how many units?
10.
Let's do something other than 10. It seems like that's all we ever do is 10. So give me something other than 10.
12.
250.
Okay, 250 units. All right, now, in terms of the mix of these units, let's just say that we've got, how many of them are, let's say, one bed, one bath?
10% on that
How much?
one. 10%, 25.
Okay. How many are two bed, two baths?
75.
Okay. And then other, which would be, let's just say,
Studio.
150.
you want to do studio? Okay, how many studio? 100?
No.
Okay, so it's 200, so the remaining 50 are going to be what?
3 bed. 3 2.
Okay, 3 bed, 2 bath, let's say. All right. So we got 250 units. All right, now, the rental rate per month for each of these. Okay, you're the ones that gave me these, so give me a rental rate per month. We'll start with the studio.
16.
Okay, 1 bedroom.
1950.
Okay, 2-bedroom,
23.
and 3-bedroom.
26.
All right. We got our base level data. I want you to go ahead and calculate what is the annual potential gross income for that.
You said annual?
Yes. Okay. We're matching up. 6135. 6,135,000. Yes. Okay. Now, to keep things simple, we'll just say across the board vacancy and collection loss of what percent?
5%.
5%. Okay. Okay. And then other income that this property would generate in terms of parking fees, other ancillary sort of services, vending machines, laundry, whatever. Okay, give me a dollar amount.
50,000.
That's pretty low for that size of a property.
Yeah, that's true. 100,000.
I still think that's kind of low. Let's just go with a couple 100,000. All right. Now, let's go ahead and calculate our effective gross income. Okay. Operating expenses. Give me a percentage. Come on, somebody from Zoom land.
20%.
25%.
Okay, thank you.
Can you just put like a minus in front of that and then?
Yes. Okay? So that gets us down to the 4,521,187.50. Okay, so up to this point, nothing new. Okay, we've done basically problems like this up to this point. But this is where, at this point, now we begin to take into account what's going to happen with regard to trying to get some sort of a loan from a lender. All right? Now, this next line item, annual debt service. This is not, I'm going to say this a couple different times, this is not just the interest expense. This is principal and interest for all of your mortgage payments for a year. Okay? So you're going to, in essence, still have a monthly mortgage payment, but you're going to have to annualize it. All right? But before we get there, we want to talk about this ratio the lender's going to use. The debt service coverage ratio, which is equal to the net operating income divided by the annual debt service. So in this case, we've already calculated our net operating income. All right. Now, let's talk about what this ratio is. The lender has one primary concern. What do you think that primary concern is?
Paying them back.
They get paid back, okay? That's really all they care about. And they want to know, you know, kind of what is the likelihood they're going to get paid back. Hopefully it's a very high likelihood they're going to get paid back. They want to do everything to maximize that likelihood that they're going to get paid back. So they want to make sure the project is generating more than enough money to be able to pay them back. Seems very simple, seems very logical. Okay, somebody's got a chat. I have no idea what. Okay. Can the rest of you guys out there hear me? Okay. All right.
Yes.
All right. So, once again, the lender wants to make sure that they're going to get paid, and they're obviously there's going to be more than enough money there to pay them back. Now, that's where they go about setting the debt service coverage ratio. Now, normally, at a minimum, now once again, this is one of those sorts of things. In my career, I have seen this number, you know, get as low as like 1.1 and get as high as 1.6. And it totally depends on just kind of how nervous, to a certain extent, lenders are about the underlying real estate market. So, in this case, I'm going to say maybe it's a 1.25 is what the lender is going to use. Now, first of all, every lender is different. So, one lender may require a 1.25 debt service coverage ratio, while another lender may require a 1.4, another one may require a 1.1, and it may be lender specific. It also could be property specific to this particular type of deal. Could be driven by the borrower. The reality is, don't worry so much about that, worry about what is the number, okay? So, in this case, if we say that we have a debt service coverage ratio requirement of 1.25, what that means is the lender wants a cushion of 25% between the net operating income the property is generating and then what you would be paying them in mortgage payments, okay? So another way to just, once again, to conceptualize that is they're basically saying, we're only going to allow you to make payments in such a way that you're going to have 25% left over after you've paid us to be able to pay for other things that you want to pay for, or to give yourself a rate of return. So we're building in a cushion above and beyond whatever we're saying that we will allow you to spend on the mortgage payment. So in this case, to now solve for the annual debt service, you're going to simply take the 4521,187.50 divided by 1.25, and that's going to give you 3616,950. And that is going to be your maximum set of mortgage payments to that lender for a year. Now, hopefully some of you out there are thinking about this. You're saying, wait a second, you haven't even talked about a loan amount, you haven't talked about an interest rate, you haven't talked about a term, you haven't talked about any of that. All you've talked about is how much are they basically going to allow you to pay them each year. That is correct, okay? Because at the end of the day, this is what the lender's concerned with. Now, what we've got to do is once we have that number, then we'll back into how much they will lend us, at what interest rate, over what term. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if we want to go ahead for the moment and just continue the math here, don't absolutely have to right now, but we will. So we're left with 904, 237.50 as our before-tax cash flow. Okay, so here's what we've got to do with this annual debt service number. We're going to take it and start off and say, okay, that's our annual debt service. Let's make that monthly. So divide it by 12. $301, $412.50. Okay? All right? You're right with me so far. Okay? Now, so we've got 12 payments per year, and what we're basically being told is the lender will allow us to have a monthly mortgage payment of $301, $412.50. So that would be our monthly mortgage payment. Okay, now is where we would then begin to say, okay, what is the interest rate they're willing to give us? What is the term in years they're willing to give us? And then ultimately, what is that going to translate into in terms of the actual loan amount they're going to be willing to give us? Does that make sense? Now, I'm purposely leaving those blank here for just a second. Is what I'm trying to say is the only constraint at this point that the lender is putting on you is the maximum mortgage payment. Okay? Once again, they haven't told you what loan amount, They haven't told you what term, they haven't told you an interest rate. So let's say you finally get around to talking about an interest rate, they give you a 5% interest rate. And let's say a 20-year term. All right, so if that's the case, let's see what we end up with in terms of a loan amount. Okay, so what we end up with is a maximum loan amount that the lender would give us based on the debt service coverage ratio of $45,671,623.43. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, now, if we were to negotiate a better interest rate, so let's just say that we got a 4% interest rate instead. Let's just see what impact that would have. Okay, so once again, that would also be the maximum loan amount based on the debt service coverage ratio, and in this case, 5% interest rate, over here, a 4% interest rate. Okay, and then the debt service coverage ratio is what, 1.25? Okay, everybody with me? So, is there anything about that you've got questions about?
Yes. I have a question. All right, on 1.25, you multiply that or divide that?
Divide it.
4 million. What was that?
Divide it.
So you divide that. Okay.
Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Okay.
So Professor, so this is just a common example of a DSCR problem, that like something that we'd see on the quiz. This would just be specifically for DSCR, right?
Right.
Okay, just making sure.
Why is the interest?
Another question,
Go ahead.
the 5%, the VCL 5% of PGI, but then the 25% is of the EGI.
Yes.
The question would state what the percentage is from.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
What does ADS stand for?
Annual debt service.
That makes sense.
Can you just explain the 1.25, how that's factoring in?
Okay, so once again, let's say that we had, instead of a 1.25, we had a 1 as the debt service coverage ratio. And what that would mean is the lender is saying you can spend all of your income on a loan, okay? They wouldn't want you to do that because you'd be spending every single dollar you're earning on the property on servicing that loan. I mean, think about it just in common sense of just like you buying a car or buying a house. Would a lender want you to spend 100% of your income on the house or on the loan? Because you'd have no money to live on. You'd have no money to buy food. You'd have no money to do anything else. Okay? Same concept here. They're simply saying, we want a 25% cushion above and beyond whatever you're going to be paying to us, that you got income greater than that, okay? So if you're paying the lender $3.6 million and your income is $4.5 million, then that difference of about $900,000 is basically that cushion the lender wants you to have so that you're not going to be financially in a bind to be able to make payments to them.
You'd still have to live off the 900,000.
Yeah, or just
whatever in general.
it's whatever money above and beyond. They just want to make sure that you've got enough money to where you're not that you're not going to be constrained. Okay? So now they may set that if they feel uncomfortable with you, they feel uncomfortable with the project, they could say, we're going to set this at 1.5. And in that case, they want that much bigger of a cushion because they're basically saying, we don't necessarily trust that you're going to generate that much income. And so by having that, excuse me, that greater cushion in there, hopefully it protects the lender. Okay. Other questions? All right. Moving on. So, in this particular case, let's kind of go back here for a second. And we've got our net operating income of 45, 21, 187, 50. Let me write that down here. $45.21.
$187.50.
Thank you. Now, one of the other sort of basic ways that the lender is going to look at evaluating the loan is taking a look at the income the property generates and the cap rate. So let's say we have a cap rate of 6%. So what would our implied value be? Okay, if you remember, our cap rate is 6%, and our annual net operating income, 45, 21, 187.50. That gives us a value of $75,353,125.
You just gave the cap rate, right, though?
Correct.
You gave it, okay.
All right. So, if that's the value that we get just using the cap rate, and the lender is willing to do a loan based on a 60% loan-to-value ratio. So we take that value estimate, multiply by 60%, this would be the maximum loan amount based on loan-to-value ratio. Okay? Now, once again, obviously these were made-up numbers, but let's take a look.
This is annual, right?
Well, I'm sorry?
The maximum loan amount is annual. Ah, no, sorry.
No, monthly payments.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's take a look at this. Our original number that we sort of threw out, maximum loan amount, was 45 million based upon the debt service coverage ratio. Maximum loan amount based on the loan to value ratio, 45 to 11. Now, as I said, typically the lender's going to apply both of these approaches, okay? And normally, what they're going to do is take the more conservative of the two, meaning the lower of the two. All right? So in this case, if they take the lower of the two, then the maximum loan amount is going to be the 45 to 11, 875. Does that make sense? Okay. Then what we may have to do is then kind of, well, back into the numbers and sort of say, all right, well, how would that adjust all of the other little details of the loan? What I'm trying to get you to see is that from the lender's perspective, they're trying to protect themselves by not giving a loan that's basically too big. Too big for you to be able to pay, or too big based upon the value of the property, okay? Which sometimes are the same thing, sometimes they're not, okay? And so, now in a lot of instances, they will show you this information. You'll probably already have done the calculations yourself, but you may be able to go in and say, okay, well, I disagree with this or that. They may or may not make an adjustment, because part of what their role is to try to come up with a reasonable, rational argument as to the dollar amount that they should give you based on, in essence, no emotion, just here it is, okay? So they are, in many instances, going to throw out things that maybe they feel are inflated. Like, for example, kind of go back to our income numbers here. They could start ripping apart your rental rates. If they feel, for whatever reason, they don't really fit that market, okay? For example, if all of the other pre-existing properties have lower rental rates than you're anticipating, why would they automatically assume that yours is going to get these higher rental rates? Unless there's something special about yours, which every developer likes to say there's something special about their project, okay? But normally, yeah, the lender's gonna probably try to trim that a bit. They would probably also, is 5% really doable in this market? They might say, let's use 10 or 15%, okay? Other income. They might just slash that completely and say, we don't care what your other income is, we want this to be driven off of the rental income on the property, okay?
Well, the same thing about the vacancy, right? They can say, oh, well, we think it's gonna be higher.
That's what I just said, yeah.
Oh,
It'd be
okay,
10 or 15%. And then same thing for operating expenses. We think you're not taking into consideration a dramatic increase in property taxes post-COVID or whatever, all right? And that is a reality. We haven't talked about this. I don't want to get too far off on the deep end on this, but
Do they get to say how big of a project you could do, like how many units then, too? Do they have a say,
well,
like this?
indirectly, I mean, from the standpoint, how much they're willing to lend you. I mean, that's what's going to drive it. But, like, getting back to what I was about to say about operating expenses, one of the things that's embedded in operating expenses are the property taxes. If you've read anything and you've paid any attention to what's going on, you know, during COVID, what has happened? Local governments have not been collecting their normal level of sales tax, okay? Dramatically below normal levels. As a result, obviously, many businesses have gone out of business. You're going to have many people who aren't going to be able to pay their property taxes. But the local government is saying, hey, we got to generate the same amount of money we generated last year, maybe even more, because we had to fight all of this stuff associated with the pandemic. So our operating costs are higher than they have been. So we're going to have to do something. So the only revenue that local governments have, for the most part, are property taxes and sales tax. So pretty much, I don't know that there's a single local government out there that's saying, hey, we're going to lower property taxes next year. Almost every single one of them is talking about 20, 30, 40% increases. Okay? Well, that's going to have a huge impact on basically commercial real estate,
But
specifically.
can they raise it? I thought it's like embedded to 10% maximum.
Well, I'm sorry?
I thought that the property taxes can be raised maximum, like the one you residential.
For residential.
Is 3%, but for the.
For residential.
Yes, but for the everything else, it's a maximum of 10%.
Yep. And they can also change those rules. Whenever a government gets desperate enough, they can change any rule they want for the most part. Okay? So don't be lulled into a false sense of security that
It's maximum 10%.
Right. So my point is there are a lot of those sort of, you know, and I don't want to be the negative guy, you know, and say, okay, all this horrible stuff is going to happen. But how do you have a situation like we've had and not have consequences? Okay? That's all I'm saying. And like I said, I'm not trying to go down the rabbit hole and get into all of the little nuance issues of that. But, you know, these are things that, once again, you as a rational, reasonable sort of person, investor, developer, whoever, needs to begin to kind of think like that of what are the implications that this is going to have. Okay? All right, moving on. All right, so all I'm saying with what I just said is the lender is going to go through and kind of make whatever adjustments that they think are reasonable, relevant, appropriate, and that's going to dictate ultimately how much they're going to be willing to lend you. Okay? Make sense? All right, any questions? From the gallery, anybody? Okay. All right. So as I said early on, oops, too far. As I said early on, debt service coverage ratio, loan to value ratios are going to be absolutely mission critical for a lender whenever trying to determine what the loan is going to be on a particular property. Now, a couple of other ratios or metrics that a lender may use. One is called the debt yield, so we'll talk about that for a couple of minutes. Now, this debt yield, the interest coverage ratio, and the fixed charges ratio, while I have seen lenders use them, and your textbook talks about them, they're just simply not as prevalent, okay? I mean, I would say it's kind of like this. Loan to value ratio and debt service coverage ratio probably make up 80+% of the decision making that the lender's going to do as it relates to a loan, okay? Other things that they may consider are probably going to be on the periphery. But specifically, as it gets to these other calculations, the debt yield is basically saying, okay, what is your loan amount? Oops. All right, and how much is your annual net operating income? So in this case, let's just take a look at what we have calculated on this one and see what it comes out to be. So 4521.
This is for interest corrigible ratio.
Debt yield.
Okay.
And then if we went, 45,671, we'll go with that one. All right, so let's just say that we took the annual net operating income that we generated from our calculations below, and we took the loan amount based upon our initial calculations, and we calculated the debt yield.
But now you took the DSCR value, yeah?
Okay, so we would end up with 0.0989, so, you know, basically 9.8%, or 9.89%. Okay, now, what the lender is basically doing, they're not getting this money. Let's just make sure that's clear. This is a way for the lender to kind of, sort of back into and say, all right, if we loan somebody this amount of money, they were generating this amount of income, what sort of yield would that be? Okay, kind of saying this is the maximum that if the borrower gave us all of their net operating income, what sort of a yield would we get on the amount we lent to them? That's why I don't really know that I've, like I said, really seen this used that often, but nonetheless, it would simply say, yeah, 9.89% debt yield, okay, from the lender's perspective. All right?
But you need to do it first with the maximum loan amount based on the
Well, if,
DSCR.
sure, or whatever I give you.
Ah. Can also be the LTV.
Whatever the loan amount is. Okay. Now, the interest coverage ratio, in this case, is net operating income divided by interest expense. So this is similar to the debt service coverage ratio, but this only takes into account the interest portion of the payment, okay? So if you've got an interest-only loan, sure, this makes sense. But if you have a traditional mortgage, I really don't know if this is going to tell you a whole heck of a lot. But nonetheless, if we were to, let's say, put that in as our net operating income, we don't have a specific interest expense. We have an annual debt service, which we could go through and we could calculate what the actual interest portion of that is. Let's just say it's $3 million. Okay? If that's the case, we would end up with an interest coverage ratio of 1.507, meaning that we've got 50% more income than we need to cover basically our interest expense. Okay?
I'm sorry, I was a little confused. You're saying that the $3 million is the interest?
Just interest.
So payments we make, interest on those payments, that's what we're...
Right.
Okay.
And I'm just estimating what that would be.
Right, I got you.
Annually, just
Yes.
annually.
There's part of me, honestly, that I'm not even covering a couple of these things because, as I said, I just don't really see them being used that much. Your textbook covers them, your textbook explains them, that's fine, that's wonderful. And I am sure that there are lenders out there that will use this for one reason or another. I'm just saying, in my experience, it's almost always been debt service coverage ratio and loan to value ratio. Okay?
But you're still doing it on the quiz.
Right.
What'd you say?
That he's still
You're
doing
still
it on the
doing it
quiz.
on the quiz.
Well, I don't want to not cover something that I feel like, that
No,
once
it's
again,
okay.
you know, the textbook provides it, and I'm not going to, you know, in this particular case, try to intervene. Okay. The next one is fixed charges ratio. So in this case, what you may have is, in essence, other items that you would basically be having to pay for. And so let's just say that we've got net operating income, but we've also got other things that we may be subtracting out. So let's just say we've got something like
This is not fixed charges.
ground rent, and also maybe a second mortgage.
This is fixed charge ratio.
Yes. In other words, you've got your net operating income, but out of that net operating income, normally you'd be paying your debt service, but also in addition to that, you may have a second mortgage, And you may have ground rent. Now, we're going to get into ground rent here in a couple of weeks' time when we get into the ground leases. Right now, simply to say, for a normal property, yeah, you're going to have a single mortgage, and it's a very straightforward thing, and that's really the only thing that you're going to concern yourself with. But you may find yourself having bought a building. You bought the building with a normal loan. Once you bought the building, you took out a second mortgage to do renovations, and it just so happens that the building that you bought happens to be on land owned by the government or some other entity. And so you really have 3 fixed payments that you've got to make every month. You're going to make your normal mortgage payment, you're going to make basically some sort of renovation loan, and some sort of ground lease or ground lease payment. Okay, does that make sense? So, and you're just going to add those up. All right, so in this case, it might be, let's just say 10,000. All right, so we add those up. 5, is it 55,000? Okay. And in this case, all we're really wanting to do is, to basically say, how much more income do we have relative to these expenses? So in this case, let's say that our net operating income is 150,000. So if we took 150,000 divided by basically 55,000,
Would divide it by?
that would be 2.72. Same sort of thing that we did with the debt service coverage ratio and the interest expense ratio. You're taking your income divided by these expenses because you want to know how much more income than we have than what we need. So here, this fixed sort of charges ratio, we were saying that we've basically got over 2.7 times the amount of income that we need to satisfy basically making these payments. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. This would be the equivalent, like for those of you that once again have bought houses and things like that, that a lender sort of saying, what other expenses do you have? You have student loans, you have a car payment, you have credit card payments, you have all this other stuff, and they want to, in essence, make sure that you've got more than enough income to be able to pay them back. That's all this is, same kind of thing.
So like a debt-to-income ratio thing.
In essence. But in this case, we're just something, it's a fixed charges ratio because it's something that, yes, we've got to continue to pay these payments each and every month for the time period we have this loan or own this property.
I have a question.
Okay, question?
Yes, is there a reason why the ground rent would not come out of the TOE?
Good question. Sometimes you will put some of these expenses outside of the traditional operating expenses because you're sort of saying this is more of a capital expense as opposed to a traditional operating expense.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on. So we've got, looks like, loan servicing, refinancing, loan points, and then front door, back door. Okay. So we're way ahead of schedule in a good way. Okay. All right. So loan servicing. So one of the things that's hard to sometimes wrap your head around are the associated expenses that lenders will claim when basically dealing with a loan. One of those are the servicing costs. Now, it does cost money to have people sitting in an office somewhere, literally going to a P.O. box or whatever, opening up that P.O. box, getting out a bunch of paper checks, opening up those paper checks, typing in the dollar amounts, posting those to the proper account, ensuring that everything is deposited properly, producing reports for investors, so forth, so on. So there's a cost associated with that. And the question is, how much of a cost is there really? And especially if it's all done electronically, and you're not even doing paper checks anymore, you can really understand it, back in the day when literally everyone did send in a paper check. Now, not so much. But this, for many, many years, was a massive business, because if you think about it, at the beginning of every month, the lender would receive, in some cases, billions of dollars of checks, okay? And they may or may not have to remit those checks to whoever the parties are till the middle of the month or the end of the month, so they can actually use the float on those checks and have a constant sort of revolving line of credit of billions of dollars, okay? Things have changed a little bit, not quite as lucrative as it once was. Short-term sort of borrowing, not as lucrative as what it once was. But a lot of these antiquated loan servicing processing fees still exist. So it is not uncommon for commercial loans for there to be a loan servicing fee of several $100s a month. Okay? So, what we're going to do is kind of work through a problem. All right. So let's say we get a loan, 12 payments per year. Give me the dollar amount. Anybody? $5 million.
7 million.
Okay, somebody beat you to it, Max. $5 million. But I'll give you the interest rate, Max.
I'll always say 27.
27?
What?
What year was he born?
No, that's not gonna work.
Okay, I'll give a 2.7% interest rate. How's that? Okay, and a term. How many years? Say 15. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get our payment. Okay, we're matching up.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what we could have in this particular case is, let's say that the lender is going to, in addition to this payment, they're going to charge you monthly processing fees of $500 a month. Seems excessive, but not unheard of. Okay? processing fees, loan servicing fees. Now, how would we adjust for that? Well, basically, from the lender's perspective, what's really happening here? This is once again going to show whether you're paying attention or you're just trying to write down words and numbers.
Extra
They're increasing their return.
They're increasing their return, but specifically, how do we go about adjusting it?
Oh,
What's
they're-
really happening here?
They're giving less money.
No?
Payment on their behalf?
Well, I'm sorry?
Would it be a payment on their behalf to us as the lender?
Yes. So what does that mean in terms of this payment amount?
It's going to increase.
It's going to increase. And it's going to increase by?
$500.
Okay. So in essence, the new payment is going to be $500 more total.
This is like merchant processing, credit card processing.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So if we were to put in 34, 312, 25 as the new payment, and just simply said, okay, they're getting an extra $500 a month off of us just for that. What does that do to their overall rate of return? Resolve for the interest rate. So basically, they go from a 2.7 to a 2.91 interest rate. Now, of course, that's making the assumption that the borrower keeps the loan for the full 15 years and so forth, so on. But nonetheless, it increases their overall yield. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay. Any questions?
Those numbers are always like set in stone for them, the fees, no matter what. You can never.
Dr. Fogey, Professor Fogey,
Yeah,
on
just,
this point,
yep,
you said you wanted to sell the property 3 years before,
yep,
and you find that year, that is you would just put in 3 years and then solve before you would,
yep.
the payment, the new payment, 3 years and then solve
Well, okay.
interest?
If you're selling it after, let's say, 3 years, the lender's only going to get 3 years worth of that $500 a month. So you would find out what the balance is going to be, you know, at the end of whatever the 36 months. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yes. Question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the 500 is always set, or do they throw that number in there? Or
It's going to be dependent on just pretty much whatever they want it to be. Now, in some cases, for smaller loan amounts, yeah, it's probably going to be fixed, but for larger ones, everything's negotiable. And I have seen some weird stuff. I mean, some really weird stuff whenever it comes to this, because,
Would they use a percentage instead of a fixed rate, like?
Yes, they
6%?
could.
Okay.
I mean, and sometimes it may be embedded so deep within the loan documents. You have to keep in mind, for a set of commercial loan documents, those documents, that could be 100 pages long, okay? And within that, there is so much opportunity for the lenders to insert all kinds of little snippy things that it's almost mind-blowing. It really is. And, but it's just the nature of the business.
But is it not like a law that they have to disclose everything?
Well, it's disclosed, but it's embedded within 100 pages worth of documentation.
if you want to go read it.
one of my jobs was to abstract commercial loan documents. I'm just doing abstracting them.
Yeah, and would you agree?
Yeah, oh yeah, no, it's, yeah, a lot of information they want on two pages, so they know what they're talking, you know, what they're
Right,
looking at.
and because there's a lot of language that could be very, you know, detrimental to a borrower, you know, if they don't really know, you know, what they're really getting themselves into. But unfortunately, with commercial loans, and I said this at probably the very first day of class, commercial loans and residential loans, probably one of the biggest differences between the two. There's all sorts of consumer protection mechanisms set up on the residential loan business. Commercial loan business, it's pretty much open season, buyer beware. Okay? That if you go get a commercial loan, you better know what you're doing. You know, don't, you know, just assume that, you know, the government's going to take care of you in the sense of protect you from being taken advantage of, because it's not going to be the case. Whereas on the residential side, there are a lot of government protection mechanisms to try to keep you from being taken advantage of, but they still don't always catch everything. Okay? All right. Moving forward. We could spend a tremendous amount of time on this topic of refinancing. I'm just going to kind of give you a few highlights. One of the things that a lot of people tend to do, and tend to do poorly, is to always want to race and refinance a loan. That interest rates drop a little bit, woo, let's go refinance that loan, okay? Well, the problem with that is that usually, now there are always exceptions, but usually there are additional costs to refinance those loans, okay? In other words, it's not typically a cost-free transaction. That if your interest rate goes from being 5%, and now you can get a loan for 4.8%, is it really worth you going through the time and the expense and so forth to refinance that loan, only a year later, rates drop again, refinance it again? Because in many cases, depending on the kind of loan that you're getting, the size of the loan, and so forth, you know, those costs to refinance the loan can be thousands upon thousands of dollars. Now, for some residential mortgages, you know, the cost may be minimal. But usually on the commercial side of things, not so easy to refinance. Matter of fact, you may be prevented and precluded from refinancing in some cases for certain periods of time. There may be what is called a lockout provision on some commercial loans that actually work to keep you from prepaying the loan. You're saying, how can a lender keep me from prepaying a loan? Well, they basically can say to you, please don't prepay the loan. You're saying, okay, fine, I still want to prepay the loan. They're going to say, you really don't want to prepay this loan. And you're like, yeah, I do. And then the lender says, okay, fine, if you're going to prepay it, we have this lockout provision that says we're not going to allow you to prepay it, but if you do and you refinance, it's going to cost you a small fortune, okay? And in some cases, it's more than just a prepayment penalty. It could, it could be a whole set of fees that end up being as much, I've seen as high as like 20 or 30% of the loan balance, okay? To basically say, you will not prepay this loan, okay? So that's another thing to consider, all right? Whenever you're looking at loans, making sure that you don't really have, hopefully, a situation with one of these, but they're out there. Now, assuming that you can refinance, let's just talk a little bit about, let's say we've got a loan. Let's say a $10 million loan. Oops, zeros. At a 5% interest rate, 30 years. All right, so that would be, let's say, what your normal payment is on the current loan that you've got, and then all of a sudden, let's say the interest rates drop ever so slightly to 4.9%. So let's see what your revised payment would be. Okay, so the difference between these two so basically difference of $609.49 a month. But for this size loan, $10 million loan, it's possible just to refinance the loan, you're going to have a new appraisal because it may be a new lender. Even with the existing lender, they may still require you to do an appraisal. Loan processing fees. The bottom line is it could be easily not just several thousands of dollars, it could be $100,000 to refinance that loan, okay? But you're only saving $600 a month. Now, over time, times 360 months, that is significant. $219,415, okay, savings. But here's the thing. Most people, for commercial or residential loans, almost never keep the loan to maturity, okay? I would say most loans probably are kept 5 years or less, okay? And so any sort of cost savings that you've got here, if you're not carrying it out for that full term, may be easily evaporated, okay? Now, another, aspect to this sort of refinancing is it all comes down to, yes, you're trying to save as much money as you possibly can as the borrower, which, good on you, that's a wonderful ambition. But what I'm simply wanting to make sure that I articulate is you need to think about what the cost of refinancing might be. And this is going to be all those additional fees and charges and so forth that you may incur up front whenever you make the loan. Are you also potentially walking yourself into a new loan that could have more restrictions than what you currently had with the existing loan? Yep.
Now, this is based on the interest rates is going down to 4.9 a year, but for another 29 years, we don't know if it's moving up or down.
Exactly. We don't. Because here's the thing. Once again, no two loans are really created equal. And let's say your first loan was 5% loan. It's with this lender over here who basically is probably one of the easiest, most straightforward lenders you've ever dealt with, okay? They don't get up in your business about anything. It's like you make your monthly payments to them, they're happy. They don't ask you any questions, they don't charge you any fees, it's just everything, 5% interest rate, done. Now, all of a sudden, you go over here to this lender that's offering you, woo, this shiny new 4.9% interest rate. And let's assume maybe they don't charge you any upfront fees. Let's say that it seems like, woo, this is a good deal. But you require all sorts of monitoring, okay? So that every single month, I, as the borrower, am going to have to submit to you basically audited financial statements on the property. Every new lease of any substantive size, I've got to get your approval. Any expenditure that I make on the property above a certain dollar amount, I've got to get your approval. So I go from having a situation with him with a nice easy peasy loan at 5% to you with 4.9, and I'm going to drive myself insane with all of the extra paperwork, all of the extra sort of documentation, all of the extra approvals, and everything else that I've got to do. Does that make sense? So those are additional trade-offs that people don't even begin to think about, okay? All right, sometimes paying a little bit more for the peace of mind, not having to deal with all of that, is worth it, okay? All right, moving forward.
Dr. Forgy?
Yep.
Just curious, in the exam, like if we were to see a question about refinancing, we would have to factor in like some of the costs that are associated with ultimately refinancing the loan, correct?
Not necessarily. I might just ask for what's the savings.
Okay.
All right, loan origination fees or loan points, let's talk about that, which we've already talked about in the previous lecture, but I'm going to kind of give some additional explanation. All right. So one of the things that when you typically hear about loans and how interest rates sometimes get quoted, they'll maybe say, okay, it's a 5% loan with 2 points to close. And a lot of people will say, what? What do you mean 2 points to close? Well, what they're referring to are sort of loan origination fees, loan points, loan processing fees, whatever you want to call these. And so, just to kind of explain real briefly where this sort of comes from. Let's say that we've got a loan, $100,000, and that we want, as a lender, to charge 2% or 2 points. Okay? Well, 2%. That's $2,000 in loan fees, okay, that would be charged on this property, all right? Now, this term points, where does it come from? The best explanation that I can sort of offer is if you think about that we want to charge 2% of the loan amount in sort of loan origination fees or loan charges, that sort of thing. We're saying, as I just said, 2%. That's basically 2.0, okay? And so what I'm trying to say here is it was a way to express a percentage by not saying a percentage twice. And here's what I mean by that. That if you heard what I said earlier, I said, okay, you're going to get a 5% loan plus 2 points. Because think of how it would sound to say, you're going to get a 5% loan with 2% loan origination fees. Sometimes, you know, it might confuse people, okay? Whereas if you kind of keep it separate and kind of call it two different things, then people don't necessarily package it all together. And so in this case, all this points business is referring to is what percentage of the loan amount are you going to charge in upfront fees and charges to make that loan. Now, every lender is a little bit different in terms of what they say those fees are being used for, but the reality of it is, it's to run their operations, okay? You know, you can slice it any which way you want, but that's what it's basically, it boils down to. Now, in some cases, historically, lenders have also allowed you to buy down interest rates. That's a whole other thing in and of itself, but basically what it boils down to is the lender will say, my normal interest rate is 5%, but if you want to prepay some interest, I'll let you buy down the interest rate to maybe 4.75, okay? But what that means is you're going to pay some money up front in order to get that lower sort of interest rate. So that's just another way to potentially charge additional fees up front.
Would you prepay it, or would it be like thrown into the loan? I guess it could be either way. Huh?
It's basically, the net result is like what we have done previously, which is the lender will, in essence, get more money up front and disperse less up front. So they make more on what they dispersed.
Right.
Okay. Now we've already done several examples of these. Let's just go ahead and work through another one in terms of loan points and previous. So this is good. Whenever I repeat these problems like this, there's a method to my madness, and I want to make sure that you are getting this embedded. It's an extremely important thing for you to do.
Dr. Forty.
Yep.
Question. The example you just gave, is that more or less a residential loan type of example? Because most commercial loans are written over spreads that they also call points, and they're usually like.
So once again, and that's why I'm trying to be somewhat loose with the language here, because for commercial and residential, it's the same thing. It's just they're calling it one thing or they're calling it another. The reality of it is they are loan origination fees.
Okay.
All right. So let's say got our loan of the million, or the 100,000. Our interest rate was 5%, we said. Our term, let's say 15 years. Start off, let's get our payment. Okay. Now, all right, so in this particular case, let's just say that we were to say, okay, it's a 2% loan origination fee, then what that really means is that the lender is really only going to be dispersing what? 98,000. So we can just put that in as our new present value, solve for what is the yield. Okay, but now what if we make this a little bit more interesting and we say, all right, what the lender is trying to do is manage their yield. And by that, what we mean is they want a certain yield. So let's just say this same problem, that they actually want a 5.5% yield. Okay? So, let's rephrase the problem. Assume they want a 5.5% yield. How much in loan origination fees would they have to charge? Okay? Once again, for the same problem. Assume that you want a 5.5% yield. How much in loan origination fees would you have to charge? Okay, figure it out. You should be able to do the logic on this pretty easily.
You put 5.5.
5.5.
So you put 5.5 interest rate and then you push present value.
Okay, so once you got the new present value, that's going to tell you the amount that they would need to sort of net net dispersal. So if you subtract that from the 100,000,
3,217.
or another way to look at it, divided by 100,000 as a whole, be 3.217 points.
How did you find that?
Yeah, what's the calculation?
Well, it's gonna
Divided by 100. Right?
Yeah, divided by the loan amount. This is a percentage of the loan amount. Okay?
So in terms of the quiz, do you have a preference in which format we use it, in the dollars or the points?
More than likely, I'll accept both.
Okay.
Say that again. You would accept either the points or the amount.
Right. I mean, usually I'll ask for one or the other, so. Okay, Now, that gets us down to the final two questions. All right, so at this point, we're going to take a break. And the reason we're going to take a break is because you at home will have on your, on the Canvas site, there is a handout labeled SFFA, the Simple Financial Feasibility Analysis, front door, back door. I want you to pull up that sheet. If you're at home, probably print it out. I've provided hard copies here to the people in the classroom. And we're going to start on that when we come back from the break in about 5 minutes. Okay?
To get the loan points, it was you divided the 3217 by the loan amount, the 100,000?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, can you pull that down, yeah?
You also sent this as an Excel or as a
No.
PDF?
Just PDF. On purpose.
Yes.
You said it's the SFFA, front door, back door.
That is correct.
That's the one.
Okay, you have to, I didn't figure that out. I just don't know how to do it, so I'm gonna ask, I'm gonna be as,
Okay, what did you not figure out?
oh my God. So after you got the 5.30 yield, and you said, okay, what is the present value if you change it to 5.5?
Well, we want a higher yield. We want more than a 5.3% yield. We want a 5.5% yield.
Okay,
So in order to achieve a 5.5% yield, how much does that mean that we are going to net as a financial institution? It means we're going to net the 96,782, which means that the borrower is going to have to pay us $3,217.52 in loan origination fees. Which
as opposed to the 2,000,
correct.
okay.
And that is basically 3.2% of the
$100,000, okay. So, but how did you get there? How did you get to the $3,217?
100,000 minus 96,782.
Okay. But where did 96,000 come from?
That's your present value.
Did you push 5.5%?
Oh, okay. So, but do you recalculate the whole thing, or do you just add 5.5%?
You're just changing the yield.
The yield, so you redo the calculation?
No,
You have to, okay.
That's where I'm
All
confused.
you're doing, you solve for this.
Right?
Once you solve for that, you put in 5.5%, put in the interest rate, then you solve for present value. That gives you 96. You subtract that from 100.
100,000, right, okay.
It gives you 32.
Okay, I just didn't know whether you had to recalculate, do the whole calculation again, or you just add it, sorry.
no, don't apologize.
I am so,
That's the advantage that we're here.
well, you know.
Oh, but he sent us a copy of the sheet.
Yeah, but I still couldn't figure out how you copy and paste this whole thing down.
You highlight the cell that you want to copy, Control C, and then
Control
drag.
C, that's what you
Yeah, and then drag it all the way down, and then Control V, it should paste it all.
Control C and then Control V
Well, Control C,
is for copy and then Control V for paste, right?
right, but then after you hit Control C, you want to highlight all the cells that you're trying to copy it to, right? And then Control V to paste it in there, into all those cells you selected.
Here.
It's probably not as easy without the mouse, but like which one are you trying to copy?
So this was then D13 minus, this one was beginning minus the principal, okay? It goes down here.
Right, so, but with those, you have to, you get to make it,
One by one.
not one by one, but, what's the word I'm looking for, like the static one, to where it keeps the, like the formula the same
No,
type of thing?
that's where the interest rate stays the same with the dollar sign. Is that what you were talking about?
Right,
So that's just for the,
right, so
where
then,
the interest is.
so then, so you have that one highlighted, then Control C. And then you wanna,
Write it down.
right,
Yeah?
yeah, so like that,
And then Control
V.
V.
Well, because there's not other numbers there that we need, you know what I mean?
Oh, so,
Yeah, because it needs all those other numbers
wait,
to,
so first I go down with this one. No, first Control C,
Mhm.
and go down.
What do we have there?
Control C.
Yeah, let's see, because it's C13 minus D13.
Which one's the,
Because I think that's just gonna basically copy the 4460.
did like this.
No, I don't think he would have done that, because that has, each one of those has a separate formula in it, you know what I mean? He's not gonna copy all three
Which
formulas.
one? Yeah. That's what I didn't understand, how you got all these numbers in.
Okay, once again, those of you that are out there in Zoom land, go ahead and make sure you're pulling up the PDF that I sent you of the SFFA, the Simple Financial Feasibility Analysis. Get that hopefully either printed out or pulled up. We can kind of
It's
reference
supposed
it.
to
We're
be
going to be doing a
without-
lot of
without mouse
calculations
back there.
here.
Some of them have to be static, like how this one has.
Hey, sir.
Yes.
Hey, do you by any chance have that on an Excel file?
I do.
Now it has like the dollar sign. How it
Because-
makes it static.
Yeah,
So that's
I
what
don't have
you
a
want
printer.
to keep that. You want to keep
What, I'm
it
sorry?
the same, so it's always going to report to
I don't have a
those.
printer, so I'm trying to see if I can just work side by side on the Excel file.
Yeah, no, I have it on Excel, but I'm not giving it to you on Excel because we're working through it by hand.
Got it. Okay.
Right, so this one is saying that cell C5, the interest rate is always going to be the same. But it should change the other cells, right?
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right, now, in my opinion, this is probably the number one most important thing, absolutely positively, to walk away with out of this program. Okay, so that says a lot in terms of, this is the sort of thing in terms of doing basic, simple financial feasibility analysis and looking at every single project using this kind of front door, back door approach, which we'll be explaining as we go through it, is absolutely mission critical. This is the sort of stuff, don't try to memorize this. Under any circumstances, try to memorize this. This is the sort of thing you've got to be just in tune with what these numbers are, what they mean, how they're being used, okay, to calculate feasibility. So, let's take a look at what you've been given, which is a PDF version of this. I did not give you the spreadsheet version of this because I don't want you using the spreadsheet version of this just yet, okay? I want you to have to do these calculations by hand, okay? I know that sounds horrible, but that's the only way you actually get a handle on this. Otherwise, it's just a, you know, basically, boom, done, you know. All right. So let's take a look at what the front door approach is. The front door approach is where you're starting off and you're saying, all right, I've got this project. Here's how much it's going to cost me to buy the land. Here's how much it's going to cost me to do the construction. And here's what my financing is going to be on this project. Here's kind of what my expenses are going to be. And then all of that translates into what is my rent going to need to be on a per square foot basis in order for this project to be feasible. Does that make sense conceptually? Yes or no? Bob your heads out in Zoom land. Okay? Now, the backdoor approach is you go from the other angle. And that is, you have a property that maybe you're wanting to acquire, or maybe you're just sort of saying, in general, I know what the prevailing market rental rates are for a particular property type within this particular area, and then you work from that angle. And you say, I start with the rents and work my way down to how much can I spend on construction, how much can I spend on the land, okay? And so these two different approaches should ultimately give you, you know, the same information, but from two different perspectives, okay? And pretty much any developer, this is what they're going to start with, always. You know, because it's a relatively straightforward way to say, does this project even begin to make sense? Because, you know, just because you have an idea that you want to build a new retail center and, you know that retail rents are maybe not all that great, what this is going to tell you real quickly is what the maximum amount that you can spend is on that particular type of property, okay? And whether or not, before you get too deep into it, whether it makes sense. All right. So, on my version, up here on the screen, mine is the Excel version. So, where I don't have to do the calculations, but you do. Okay, so let's just sort of start off, okay? Give me a dollar amount for land cost for the property that we want to acquire.
7.5.
5 million.
7.5 million?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, 7.5 million, our site acquisition cost. Now, normally, once again, that site acquisition cost, that's going to be land cost and any sort of just general prep work for that land. Okay? All right? Now then, construction cost, this is going to be all costs that we're going to incur on any sort of physical structure that we build on the land. Okay? Give me a dollar amount for that.
120 mil.
That seems a bit high. Let's put it this way. So, my experience has been land cost should be nowhere more than 10 to 20% of the overall construction cost. There are exceptions, always are, but let's just say I'm going to go with 50 million. Okay. Now, at this point, you can write all this down on your sheet if you want to. You don't have to at the moment. We'll kind of come back, work through some other ones. Right now, I just want you to follow the logic train. Okay, so all we've done is add two numbers together, land cost and construction cost, okay? Now, here's the thing about this sheet. I have tried to make it as straightforward as I possibly can, in that on the left-hand side of the sheet, you will see plus, equals, multiply, equal, multiply. So in other words, you know what the operation is that you need to do in terms of adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, okay? So that much is given to you. So we've done our first calculation. All right, now, all right, so here's the way this worth thinking about this. We've got our land, we've got our construction estimate. We walk into our lender, and our lender says, boom, the maximum loan-to-value ratio that I'm willing to give you is what?
80/20.
70%, let's say. All right? So by popping that in, the calculation that you would be doing would simply be taking the 57.5 million times 70% to get a loan amount or permanent mortgage of $40,250,000. Everybody see that? Oh, look here. We have our good friend that we thought we had forgotten about, our mortgage constant. Okay? Well, our mortgage constant, if you remember, is driven by our interest rate and our loan term. Okay? So, that same lender that gave us the loan to value of 70%, what interest rate are they going to give us?
6.
And how many years?
30,
That's probably a bit much.
20.
Let's go 20. Okay. Now, this is probably the one and only calculation that requires a teensy bit of effort on your part. To get that mortgage, to get the mortgage constant, here's what you're going to do. And this is where, unfortunately, trying to change between screens is not going to be an easy thing for me to do. So I'm going to try to do it over here. All right, so what you're going to do, you're going to put
Is it 12 shift N in the beginning or 12 shift payment?
Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to put in 12 shift in, 6% interest rate, 20 shift in at your term, $1 is your present value. Calculate the payment. That's going to give you the monthly mortgage constant, but we need the annual. So we're going to multiply that by 12. So let's just see what we get. Okay, multiply that by 12. Okay. And what we do, we should end up with negative 0.08597172770, which matches up with what we have over here. Okay?
Oh, so you want to go all the way, like?
Well, because you
far
need
with the
you need
decimals?
to, for the purposes of being accurate. That's the one thing about, at least until I find an alternative solution about the Canvas answers. This is probably the one time that, trying to round things off just doesn't work. Okay. Anyway, okay, so that's how you get that mortgage constant by hand, okay? Now, obviously, in Excel, you can see, if you look at the formula, it's just simply the payment function, and simply basically putting in $1 for your present value or loan amount. Okay, so that gives us our mortgage constant. All right, so once you've got your mortgage constant, then the next calculation that's basically done for you is you're going to simply take your loan amount, multiply it by your mortgage constant. That's going to give you the cash required for your debt service. Okay? So in other words, that is going to be the amount of money that you would be making in monthly payment, or sorry, annual payments to the lender. Okay? All right, everybody good? Okay, now, then we need to know the debt service coverage ratio. Okay, so give me a debt service coverage ratio.
1.3.
1.3. Boom. So here, the only difference between what we are doing right here versus what we did earlier today is we're working backwards. Okay? Here we're starting out with the annual debt service and saying, what is our debt service coverage ratio to say what income do we have to have? Okay? So taking the 3.46 million, dividing by 1.3 gives us, or sorry, multiplied by 1.3 gives us 4,498,000. Okay, would be our required net operating income that we would need on this property. All right? One of the things that you should start saying from the very first day in class, that hopefully you're beginning to see that you've got to be able to do is work backwards, work forwards, work sideways, with these numbers, because ultimately they all get used in some way, shape, or another, but it's not always a nice, traditional, linear path. You are, in many cases, you only have certain numbers to begin with, and therefore you've got to figure out what you sort of don't have. Okay? All right, so that's our required net operating income. Hopefully you match up with that. Now here, operating expenses. So this would be the equivalent of total operating expenses on line on the income statement. Now, we can actually enter a 0 here if we wanted to. Don't need to, but I'm just saying we could, because one of the things that we haven't really talked about is that sometimes expenses are passed on, you know, directly to tenants. Other cases, the property owner pays for them, depending on whether we have, basically on one end of the spectrum, an absolute triple net lease, or on the other end of the spectrum, a gross lease, okay? And different properties, different property types, different markets dictate, basically, how leases are set up. Even across countries, they can be regional differences. And in many cases, all driven sometimes by history. That if you have the predominant property owner in a particular city that for whatever reason had a proclivity to give out gross leases, many of those leases are still going to be gross leases, okay? Whereas other parts of the country, the same could be true for net leases. And so it's, what matters here is obviously you as the developer, investor, whoever, lender, being aware of who's going to pay for what. So, in this case, these operating expenses you put in here are going to be ones that are going to be paid for by the property owner or the investor. So, if you're choosing to pass on all of these expenses to the tenants, you don't really need to enter a whole lot here. But if you're going to keep some, let's just say that we put in, I don't know, 300,000. What that's going to do is just raise the income because those are going to be obviously expenses. All right. And keep in mind,
I'm sorry, why do expenses raise the income?
because we're working backwards. Everything is in the opposite world because we're working backwards. Okay. So in this case, let's say that we have an expected occupancy rate of, I don't know, give me a rate. 95%. 95%. That means our required gross revenue or potential gross revenue would need to be $5,051,021.70. Okay, now the final calculation for this approach, the front door approach, would be all we need to know is how many square feet do we have in this property?
$85,000 square feet.
Let's go up to, let's say 100,000 square feet. That's still fairly high rent rate on an annual basis. So if we have that many square feet in the property, then our required rent rate per square foot would be $50.51. Okay? Does everybody understand? Now, the fun part about this, not for you because you're having to do this by hand right now, is now we can go in and just start tinkering with the assumptions. What if we can get a lower interest rate? Okay, we get a lower interest rate. Look at what that does. That lowers the rent required per square foot. Totally makes sense. Okay? You know, what if we can lower our construction cost to $45 million? Same thing. That's going to lower, obviously, the rent that we need per square foot. what if we can lower our land acquisition price from 7.5 million to, let's say, 5 million? And so forth, so on. You get the general idea of that all of a sudden, now we have this dynamic ability to be able to go in, modify assumption by assumption, and then see in real time, ultimately, how that's translating into the overall project financial feasibility, and saying what rental rate would we need to have in order for this project to be feasible or not feasible. Okay? So right now, what we're saying, based upon the assumptions we now have on the screen, is we would need to get 41 bucks a square foot. Okay? Now, the assumptions that we started with were 7.5 million, and I believe 50 million, and an interest rate of 6%. Okay, so now your numbers should match if you've been writing them down. Okay, but the point with this is the kind of thing that you as an investor, you as a developer, are going to want to be able to very quickly be able to kind of go through, do these calculations and see, well, what does that really translate into in terms of the rent that I would need in order for this project to be successful or not successful. Now, depending on the property type that you're dealing with, if you're dealing with apartments, you're dealing with retail, you're dealing with the office, you make whatever adjustments that you need to make in terms of how you go about, doing this calculation. Maybe per unit instead of per square foot, okay? But, those are all very easy little adjustments that you can make, okay? Any questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes? Question or not?
I know that you're using the expected occupancy rate, but throughout the examples you've given us, we've used vacancy rate. I know it's being used interchangeably, but it's a little confusing.
Yeah, and in this case, that's just what we've chosen to call it.
Okay.
So you've always got to be, I guess, paying attention to whether we're dealing with occupancy or we're dealing with vacancy.
Okay.
Can you show the annualized mortgage constant formula again?
Yeah.
The actual Excel?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay.
Could you please show the,
Okay, now,
could you please show the calculation and walk through the type up you did for the interest one more time? Just want to try to figure out.
I'm sorry, what?
For the, how you've been showing us the second screen, so you typed it out, on how it would be with the shift in the calculator? Yeah, okay. I just wanted to see if you put it in this one. All right, no problem. That's it.
Okay, now, let's sort of reverse the process and the backdoor approach. So what I'm going to do here, just to sort of show you there's no magic other than it's just numbers and calculations, we're going to pretty much just type in the same numbers. Okay, so we're going to start with leasable square feet of 100,000. Rent per square foot, I'm just going to type it in as 5051. Realizing because of rounding, it may be off a little bit. Yep, you can see just right off the bat, just so that no one gets crazy, because we rounded it off to 5051, you notice that there's a $21.70 difference, once again, just due to rounding. Okay? Occupancy, 95%. Expenses, and what do we say our debt coverage ratio?
1.3.
1.3. interest rate was 6% for what, 15 years or?
So backdoor is completely backwards,
Yes.
right?
Okay. And we said the maximum loan to value was what, 70%?
Yes.
And then the construction cost we said was 50 million. Okay, so what you find with the backdoor approach, you end up with, in other words, what is the maximum dollar amount that you can spend on the construction cost as well as on your site acquisition or land cost. Obviously, because of rounding, this would be 7.5 million, but because obviously it's just simply the carry through of that little penny or so difference, it obviously changes things ever so slightly. But my point with this is just the exact mirror image of the front door approach. It's just simply using the same data to work it backwards. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
So we use this formula, this spreadsheet, when we're evaluating a particular property that we may be interested in, where we're only given certain variables to put in, whether it's the front door approach or the back door approach, correct?
Right. I mean, you look at what the inputs are. They're pretty basic. You know, it's how many square feet, you know, what the rent rates are, what your expected occupancy, your expected expenses, your expected loan information, and then ultimately, you know, it pretty much spits out how much you can afford to spend on it.
Are you saying which approach to take?
No, because it's totally dependent upon what you're trying to accomplish.
And also the information that you have.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, let's say, I don't know, I'm walking in downtown Miami, there's a property for sale, all right? And it is currently for sale, it is currently for sale for 57 million, all right? And based upon what the loan I can get on that property, and the expenses and the occupancy rate and the size of it, that's what I've got to get in rent in order for that property to make sense to me as an investor. Pure and simple. So that's the approach I would use. Now, if I also happen to be walking in downtown Miami and I say to myself, all right, I'm thinking I may want to build something here, okay? And so I look around and I say, okay, how much are properties leasing for? They're leasing for $50.51 a square foot. If I want to build a 100,000 square foot building, how much can I afford to spend on basically construction and acquisition cost? So it's totally dependent on what it is you're trying to answer.
And in most cases, we're trying to increase value, correct? We're not just trying to match what we can get on the market, but we're also trying to increase value.
Like, I mean, here's the thing. You know, in this first scenario, we're saying we need to get $50.51 in order to satisfy our basic requirements. But if we can get higher than that, in the sense that we can actually get, let's say, $60 a square foot, that means we're going to get even a higher rate of return for ourselves. Okay? What we could actually do is we could use the model below to say, well, what if we're able to get $60 That's the only variable we change. Then what that translates into is, instead of only being able to spend $7.5 million on the land, now all of a sudden we can spend up to $19 million on the land, just by getting that extra $10 a square foot in rent. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's what makes this so powerful. Because you're taking into account your construction cost, your land cost, your financing cost, market conditions, and market rents all together to basically say, okay, how does that translate into overall financial feasibility?
Then you can start messing with the loan terms too if you want a faster return.
Okay, just out of curiosity, you guys out in Zoom land, turn your cameras on for a second. I want to take a quick poll. Okay, so how many of you are currently enrolled in the market analysis class? Yes? Right now? Most of it. Okay. Now, I have my own perspective, but you tell me, what do you think the most important key element of a market analysis class is or should be?
Financial aspect of it.
What?
The underwriting of the financial aspect.
No.
I think understanding like
highest
the
and
target
best use.
markets and where the like keep the population in that area.
Nope.
Whether project
No,
is
the
feasible
dollar
in the
per
area,
foot.
no?
What, I'm sorry, Jim?
The dollar per square foot.
Yes. What your rent rates are, what the lease rates are, and getting accurate information as to what those are for the different property types that you're looking at. Because what is market analysis? It's just understanding what is the market, what are the rental rates, what are the sale prices, you know. That is what you're trying to get. You'd say, ooh, that should be easy. Not so much, you know. Sometimes it's difficult to get at that information to where it's actually useful to you. But that one piece of information is what drives this whole model, in the sense of that rental rate of $50.51 here that we're using, that's driving the model. If we're wrong about that number, that we did not collect the right information from the market, and we're using the wrong number there, that throws off everything. That's why this sort of stuff is so important, to try to make sure that you're getting the right information, okay?
But that would also just be based upon comparables, being able
Sure.
to get comparable product.
But but here's, okay, simple answer, yes. Complex answer is no two properties are identical. They may be physically identical, but even if they're across the street from each other, there are potentially differences, okay? And one of the problems this summer with the capstone course is that people were using bad information about what the proper comparables were for the site for the capstone project. Common problem. Because they say, well, maybe there wasn't enough information here, or maybe we didn't find the right information, or maybe we didn't look deep enough, or maybe this or that or the other thing. You've got to do a deep dive, you know, with this sort of information and make sure that the kind of property that you are using as comparable is truly a comparable, okay? And it's not necessarily as easy as you might think to be able to come up with that information and to get that level of detail. Sometimes it requires still a lot more than just, internet-based research. It still requires you maybe contacting the property owner, the property manager. So, in addition to other, sources. But my point is, you're coming back to this extremely, extremely important sort of mechanism for you as a prospective investor developer to be able to use this sort of tool to your advantage to be able to sort out what makes sense, what doesn't. Okay, other questions on it?
Yeah, I have another question or comment. So when we're looking at these properties, using the example you just made about the capstone project, so we go into the area and we identify, let's just say, a basis for determining what that square foot model was going to be. So we find property A, and we say, in the market, we could probably get $2 for this particular type of property. Then we may want to look at it and say, we can increase the value on it, just like in the previous example, you say we can get $60 per square foot as opposed to $50 per square foot. In order to do that, then now we've got to offer certain amenities that are above and beyond property A in order to achieve that, and then you back into the number of people who have the available funds to purchase or rent that particular property. Is that a correct approach?
Right. Yep. Now, one of the other things that I've included down here, we'll get into later, is basically some additional analysis where kind of go through, put in the cash flows for each year, ultimately calculate what the returns are, and so forth, so on. We're not going to do that today, but nonetheless, this model, this basic model, feeds into the whole thing of financial feasibility for the project as a whole, and making whatever assumptions that we need to about income and expenses and so forth for the property as a whole, and how that translates into what sort of a rate of return we're going to get on our money. Okay? All right. Other questions before we move on? Okay, that takes care of the quiz information for today. All right. Now, let me see how fortunate I am going to be in terms of showing you something else. Not that one. There we go. Okay, let's see if this will screen share. There we go. All right, so is the screen share working with the mortgage on there, mortgage model? Okay, I have not sent this to you, once again, on purpose, okay? But this is what we're going to be working toward. This is basically taking, you know, as an example, just a basic sort of amortization schedule and modifying it to include all the different little bells and whistles that we begin to explore here in our class. So let me just kind of walk through a couple of things here with this model. And you will be getting eventually a copy, but not right now. Still want you to be doing these things by hand. Okay. So with this model, you've got the normal stuff, the loan amount, interest rate, number of years, start date of the loan. Then you can also make extra payments each month if you choose to. It shows how much your monthly payments are, early payments, total interest, that sort of thing. But the part that we've really focused our attention on are these items over here. As we talked about today, loan origination fees or points. All right, that you can simply put in, okay, what is that percentage? Monthly servicing fees, okay, how much are those? Prepayment penalties or prepayment fees, when those prepayments occur, then how all of those things taken together come up with an effective cost of borrowing. And then down below, you can actually change the interest rate. Here it's set at 5% each month. You can change it every single month to a different interest rate, okay? So let's just kind of go back. I just want to show you a couple of quick little things. So let's just say we start off with a $100,000 loan, 10% interest rate, 30 years, no extra payments. Okay, let's go over here. No loan origination fees. And we don't prepay it. Okay. So this is just a basic sort of model. $100,000 loan, 10% interest rate, 30-year term. You can see, just like if you were to have put it in terms of your, excuse me.
You want a lifesaver?
No, sucker. Okay. Oops. Okay, so I think I've got it all set here. Okay, now, so this is just going to be like any other sort of amortization schedule. We got the beginning balance, schedule payment, no extra payment, what the principal interest would be, what the ending balance would be. But then the columns that we have added in is an interest rate column to basically be able to manipulate the interest rate month by month. Then a lender cash flow column that basically would start with, kind of like you would in a cash flow in the calculator, what is the initial dollar amount the lender is dispersing, and then what are they receiving each month, and then ultimately what's their cost of what's your cost of borrowing or the lender's yield. Now look here at this cell, the 100,000. If we go up and we change the loan origination fees to 2%, look what happens. Boom. Now it's $98,000, just like what we had worked today in class. Okay? Now what if we had had $500 monthly servicing fees? Boom. Okay? Automatically your mortgage payment goes from $877.57 now to $1377.57. Okay? Now then, prepayment penalties. Let's say we charge a 5% prepayment penalty and the loan is paid off, I don't know, in month 3. All right? So what it's doing is it's basically automatically doing the calculations to where the payment is prepayment is occurring here in month 3, and then calculating what is the effective cost of borrowing, which is basically nothing more than an internal rate of return calculation. But if we go back up here just for fun, and we change that to a 0, you'll see then obviously the amount that we have to pay off has been lowered. Just like if we change obviously that back to 0, and then once again, no loan origination fees. Now, the only reason I'm showing you this is this is kind of what we're working toward, okay? So right now, we've pretty much done all of these elements on the calculator. And so kind of the next logical thing is to begin to kind of translate a lot of this into Excel. So we'll work a little bit more on some of the Excel today, but starting next week, for the last couple of weeks, then we'll have more Excel that will be focused on kind of completing this model and a handful of other things. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Any questions? Okay, is the gallery still out there, or are you guys asleep? Okay, all right. All right, any questions? Okay, so what you should have done, stop share that. Let's see, the other mortgage model, the one that I provided you, or basically we did last week. Let's pump that back up.
To open that?
Sure. Okay, so this model that you've got up on your screen is the one that I sent to you via Canvas after last week's class. So this is the bare basic bones model. Now what you hopefully did is spent just a few minutes going through and trying to kind of take a look at what the formulas were, kind of understanding those, and then being prepared to kind of ask maybe some questions as we then begin to kind of complicate this up a little bit. Okay? So with that, I'm just going to open it up initially for questions before we kind of move a little bit forward. Is there anything about the model you don't understand? And we have crickets. Okay. All right. No questions? Shock. All right. Well, in that case, then let's just go ahead and kind of, I guess, begin things.
You know, sometimes it's hard to know what you don't know.
All right. So, with that, what we can do is begin with what we would call our, I think on the other one I maybe called it sort of lender cash flow. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a column called lender cash flow, and we're going to start at one sort of payment above basically month one. We're going to sort of create a time zero sort of cash flow, just like the model I just showed you. And so here, the first cash flow is going to be the amount of dispersal, which would be, in this case, the loan amount. Okay? But since this is lender cash flow, that dispersal is going to be a negative. So we're just going to simply make it equal negative C3. Okay? And then what cash flow are they going to be receiving each month? The payment. Okay? Without making any adjustments to it. So we're going to just simply say, okay, equal over here to the payment. All right? And if we want to, we can copy that down. I'm just going to copy it down just a little bit. I'm not going to copy it all the way down, just for the illustration purposes. Okay. So let's just start with one of the first things that we dealt with today, which was the loan origination fees. Okay, what percentage loan origination fees would we like? 2%? Okay, sure. Everybody's so excited. Okay, 2%. Go ahead and pop that in there. Maybe make it all a nice little percentage. Kick it over a couple of decimal places. All right. So if we have a 2% loan origination fee, we need to adjust this initial cash flow basically for that loan origination fee. So how do we do that? Okay. In terms of the math, we're simply going to take that, and we can do it a couple of different ways, but we could just simply say times 1 minus the 2%, which would be 98%. Okay? Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, can you go back to that?
Go back to that.
1 minus.
In other words, how much is the lender getting to keep? Or how much are they really dispersing? 98%. Okay, so 1 minus 2% is 98%.
Gotcha.
Okay, what about servicing fees? We were saying $500 a month. Okay. And also clean that up a little bit. Okay. So, how's that going to affect our cash flow down below?
You have to add it to the payment.
We have to add it to the payment. Now, is this G4, what is that, a static or a dynamic cell reference? Remember that from last week?
It's going to be static.
It's going to be static, it's going to be fixed. So we're going to make it $G, $4. So now we've fixed that first one. Everybody see that? So now instead of 5303, it's now 5803. Okay? So now, just for that, we can go ahead and copy down. Okay? So I'm just trying to, we're doing this incrementally so you can kind of get a sense of what we're doing. So let's just look. If we were to go and we were to change that to $0 a month, then it puts it back to the original amount. Oops. Okay.
So what's the formula under H12?
It's just going to be what the monthly payment was plus whatever the servicing and administrative fees are. Okay. All right. Any questions up to this point? Good? All right. Let's see. So the other things, let's take a look at prepayment penalties. Okay, let's say that's 5%. Now, what I want you to do is want you to calculate basically what would be, and I'm not going to build this one exactly the same as I did my other one, but let's just say penalty. Well, the penalty is based on what? The loan balance, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so in this case, if we simply took, okay, that's the balance times penalty rate, that's the penalty amount, okay? Oops. Come on. There we go. All right, we want that to be fixed cell reference. You're not going to get charged that rate every single time, but we want to go ahead and put it in there just for for fun. So, here's what I want you to do. I want you to sort of think about this for a second. If in this particular month, I'm going to go ahead and put just because I'm going to try to illustrate the concept. Okay. In month 1, let's say that we prepaid the loan. Okay. So what would the actual cash flow be? It would be basically what? Let's make it month 2. I'm going to try to make sure that you're clear on what's happening here. All right. So if we repay the loan in month 2, what is the lender's cash flow going to be in month 2?
It's going to be the ending balance plus the penalty.
Correct. Plus
The payment.
the payment plus the administrative fee.
Oh, yes.
So in other words, it's going to look like it's going to have those plus the ending balance plus the prepayment penalty. So the total cash flow is going to be $524,027.31. Okay? So what we can actually do is use the internal rate of return function think we have to do it divided by 12. Oops, hello. Divided by 12. And we have to make that a, let me see here. Times 12. There we go. Okay, so let's just check this. I want you to put this on your calculator. This would be 12 payments per year. Let's just see if this actually matches up. So 490,000 plus or minus cash flow, 5803, 28 cash flow, 524, 027, 31 cash flow, and then solve for internal rate of return. There it is, 4809. Okay? Everybody follow?
Can you go back to the, can I see the formula for the IRR, please?
Okay, so for the IRR, all you're doing is you're selecting the range, and then you're multiplying it by 12, because these are monthly cash flows, and you need to, in essence, make it an annual return.
Gotcha.
Okay?
All of this is not on the quiz now.
No, it will be, but not on this one.
Or
So
next
is there
week.
a, sorry,
Okay?
so you have the range and then the guess is what? Nothing?
No, you don't have to do anything with the guess. Just
Okay.
ignore the
All right,
guess.
that's what was throwing me off. All
Ignore
right.
the guess. Okay? All right. Well, I can tell that you're oversaturated for the day because no one is even paying attention. So, with that, what we're going to do is we're going to cut this discussion off today, and we'll pick it up next week along with the new material. The quiz today opens up in about 30 minutes. Any other questions you've got?
I see the formula under, next to the IR, the 524, 500, yeah, that one.
No, I think she's talking
No,
about the other
over.
one. Where you
Yeah,
got the 5.
thank you.
So I'm having issues with the IRR. It's H11, 12, and 13,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're multiplying that by 12?
Mm-hmm. Okay? Any questions? All right. My advice to you is spend some time over this next week playing around with what we've just done and try to understand how to use basically the internal rate of return function within Excel, and see if you check yourself using the financial calculator. But you should be able to then begin to kind of move backwards and forwards and get a sense for what the calculations would be. The other thing that we're going to be throwing into this, there's some really cool functions within Excel. Specifically, I'll just go ahead and briefly mention them now. One are if-then statements. Have any of you ever used if-then statements before? Hands up or down, okay? So, one of the fundamental basics of just kind of general, what do you want to call it, computer programming, or in this case, Excel sort of programming, is to use something called an if-then statement. And what if-then statements allow you to do, in many cases, is to create decisions, okay? And based upon a set of criteria, if something meets the set of criteria, then we want this to happen, okay? Well, what we're going to do here is if the month of prepayment is equal to the month that it actually prepays, then we want it to tell us what is basically the rate of return for that month. If it's not the month of repayment, then don't tell us that, okay? So that's one of the things we're going to use it for. But we're also going to use an index feature to be able to look up values within a particular sort of table. So there's a couple of different little things, little tricks that we're going to explore next week. But so what, if you really want to try to get a little bit of a head start, take a look at if-then statements within Excel and take a look at index, okay, within Excel. And we'll kind of play around with those then starting next week, okay? Any other questions about anything else?
Yes, Dr. Forty, can you open up the quiz 5? Because for some reason I can't see the quiz 5.
Oh, I'm sorry, what?
On quiz 5, you know, all the other quizzes I can go back and look at, but for some reason I can't see what I got wrong. It's kind of hard to make out through my notes.
Okay, I'll take a look, but I thought that is it not available?
No, it doesn't open up. Only thing I have is the solution that you sent out, but I can't see.
Right now, you can't see any of it.
Yeah, it doesn't show us what we got wrong. It only shows, it says we have like whatever our grade is, but it won't let us open up to say, okay, this is the ones we got wrong, or to verify what our answers were.
Here, I'll show you right here.
Okay, all right, I'll see if I can turn on whatever's not turned on in Canvas.
Yeah. So when you pull it up, normally you would see like the quiz down below with the questions and answers.
Okay, I'll see if I can fix that. Okay, anything else?
Dr. Forgate.
Yep.
Okay, kind of aside from class, I was playing around with this Excel, and I did something that I'm an agent, so I have some investors, and sometimes they buy with a mortgage to rent. So a few extra columns to see what their cash flow would be depending on the rent amount. Could I send it to you just to see if it looks correct, to make sure I'm not telling them nonsense?
Well, I'm sorry. I guess okay. What is it I'm doing? What's the question?
It's just looking over a spreadsheet. I edited the spreadsheet you sent. Just to really for investors if they were buying like an apartment or something to rent out. To see what the cash flow would be. I just wanted you to look over it to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Yeah, okay, send it to me.
Okay, nice.
Okay, anything else? Okay, is that it? Okay, we will see you next week then.
Good day.
So, I have a question. When if I have a problem in the Excel sheet, how to get to the numbers, is there a way to contact you to ask for that?
I'm sorry, so what?
Like last week when we did this Excel sheet, the first one, I was trying to do it. At the very end, when you did this copy and paste thing, I wasn't capable of producing that. And I didn't know how to...
When you were copying the formulas down?
Yes.
Like on the rest of the...
Okay, what about it?
Like is there a way, like if I still cannot figure it out, is there a way to send you an email, can you help me with that, or how does...
Yeah, I mean, if there's something you don't, yeah, just send me an email.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Parking beacon.
Probably a mix.
Thanks, Larry. I have a question real quick on this one here from our last was for the cap rate.
Mm-hmm.
When I went back to do it, you had that the solution is 10 minus 3 to get 0.07, but we're only given cap rate, well, risk-free, right? We give risk-free, and we're given expected, which is growth rate, actually, right? Expected growth rate is to 2%. This estimates 10%, which is going to be
12 minus 2.
right. 12 minus 2, like 12. But we have to figure out the cap rate, don't we? Yeah. So, let's see.
Was it not correct in the solutions?
Well, that's why it just said 10 minus 3, but on my paper it had, one second, I have my solutions right there. Here it is. So we did the cap rate, right? It was we're solving for cap rate, so it's 10 minus 2, which is 8 for cap rate. So cap rate is cap minus risk, which is risk-free rate, which we're given. So then we have to subtract it from 8, don't we? 8 minus 3?
Okay. I
Or-
don't remember, let me look at the question. I mean, I'm not sure which quiz was this?
4. That's how the solutions, but it's just 10 minus 7, which I wasn't sure of that. Or 10 minus 3.
Okay, was question which?
4.
Yeah, so 10 minus 3 would be 7. Yep, because the discount rate's 10%, risk-free rate's 3%, so all you're doing is you're just taking the difference between those two.
But don't we have to solve for the cap rate to get to, isn't the formula cap rate equals risk plus premium, risk premium plus risk-free rate?
We don't. In this case, basically you're just being given extra information by having the growth rate in there. All you really need to take into account is just what the discount rate is and the risk-free rate.
Oh, just subtract those two.
Yep.
And that gives you the cap rate. Is that what you're?
Well, no, it gives you the risk premium. Risk premium is just simply how much are you being rewarded above and beyond the risk-free rate.
Oh. Wait. I'm a little confused on that. Okay, so assume the property's discount rate is estimated to be 10%. I'm still a little lost.
No, okay, look, if you're, whatever the number was, I've already forgot. If it was 10%, that's your discount rate, and your risk-free rate is whatever, 3%, then you're just simply saying the difference between 10% and 3% is 7%, that's your risk premium, that's what you're getting in terms of.
So the risk growth, the growth rate doesn't really matter?
It's irrelevant.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, makes sense.
Yep.
All right, cool, thank you.
Absolutely.